Hello, I'm Lisa, and I'm excited to be back here sharing with you on the Whimsy Stamps channel. I'm going to share a few photos from the Whimsy Stamps Workshop Weekend before we get started with our card making process. I thought I'd share a few highlights from the disco themed weekend, and it was loads of fun. So, Whimsy's newly released disco themed products were the perfect match for the disco themed weekend, and it was such an awesome opportunity to teach a hot foiling class. It was my first time teaching at an event or even being at an event, so I have lots to share. We were sponsored by Simon Says Stamp with their fine detail scissors. Alpine Bake Shop. Iris from the Whimsy Stamps new release team owns Alpine Bake Shop, and she loaded us down with her mouth-watering sweets. If you ever get the opportunity to have some of her amazing products, you have to try them out. Plus, we had Crooked Wrinkles, Our Gray Barn, Local King Rubber Stamp Company, Scrapbook Adhesives, and a few more that offered products, coupon codes, and more. We want to say thank you so much for helping make this event a success. Now, with a little help of a private Facebook group, we got the party started early by posting graphics to learn more about what the attendees were hoping to see at the event. So, of course, one of the questions was, what is your favorite snack when you're crafting? And we use that information to build a self-serve snack bar filled with the attendees' favorite snacks. It was just a blast. Inspiration was everywhere, and I'm so sorry for sounding like a broken record during the event, constantly saying I have a video tutorial sharing that entire process. Classes and take and makes filled the weekend. Everyone was so friendly and encouraging. It was a lot of fun for my first event of this type, but also it was a little overwhelming at times too, but in a good way. So, of course, Whimsy had a great pop-up shop with so many wonderful products to choose from. Like I mentioned, everybody was just so warm and so welcoming, and the teachers were amazing. We just all laughed and had such a wonderful time. And I wanted to share a little bit of that with you. Maybe you've never been to a Whimsy event and you've often wondered what it was like. And this is going to give you a little insight into what it was like to be at that Whimsy Workshop Weekend. So much fun. So now what we're going to do is we're going to hop into a card making process. Now, this was a take and make that everyone at the event took home with them so that they could join me here on the YouTube channel to create the cards with me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share the products that I used. For those of you watching that don't have the kit from the event, if you have these products in your stash, you can join along with us. Or if you like what you're seeing, I'll have all the products linked down below using my affiliate links. If you shop through those, I do earn a small commission if you shop directly through those links. And let me tell you, it is very much appreciated. So let's go ahead and dive into this card making process and the products that I used. And then we'll go ahead and break out the kit, and we'll talk more about what was included in the kit for the attendees at the event. So here are the products that I used to create these two cards, starting with the It's Coffee Time die set. This is newly released from Whimsy Stamps. This is such a great coffee die set. I absolutely love it. You can use it with the letters cut out of the coffee cup, or you can just cut the coffee cup out by itself. It also has a shadow die that we're going to be using on that shaker card. And then there's other elements in there as well. So next up, I'm going to be using a background stamp. This is the tartan background stamp from Whimsy. Now, if you're doing this at home and you don't have the tartan background stamp, not a problem. Pick your favorite background stamp. Some of the ones that I thought of were maybe like the fall leaves. Those would be great on that coffee cup and frame. They're just so beautiful. Any of the like messy mesh background, those would be great. The die that I was just showing you is from the Revealers 1 die set. We're going to use that die to create smoke or steam coming up off of our coffee cup there on the left. I also have Coffee Break here. I'm using the Thinking About You sentiment from it. But if you have another sentiment set from Whimsy that you want to use, by all means, go ahead and make this your own and use whatever sentiment you want. Now here I have the Slimline Fence die set. I'm going to show you how easy it is to take the long die cut pieces and create a wood grain tabletop to set your coffee cup on. It's so easy. If you were at the event, you received a box of goodies from This Calls for Confetti, and in that box there was a coffee mix. We're going to be using that in the shaker card. So if you have that, you want to go ahead and pull it out. If you don't have that coffee mix, if you weren't at the event, you can use any coffee colored mix that you have or sequins. It's completely up to you. It's just a shaker card. So whatever you want to put in there, feel free to fill it with your choice of sequins or clay shaker bits. It's completely up to you. Okay, so I want to go ahead and dive into the pieces from the kit, and so that everybody who was at the event can make sure they have what they need. And we're going to start with the Landscape A2. You should have 3 of these die cut slimline fence pieces in your kit. You should also have these little oval shapes that come with the coffee cup die set. There should be 7 of those in there, and they're probably a gray color. I'm going to show you how to change this up some during this video. I had showed you the 3 layers of steam we're going to be using. You should have had those, and you should have at least 1 solid die cut cup out of white cardstock, and of course your sentiment strip and your Landscape A2 card base. Now for our shaker card, you should have the coffee confetti mix. You should have 7 of those oval shapes from that It's Coffee Time die set. You should have a coffee cup that's cut out and has the letters cut out of it, and you'll just punch those out yourself. You should also probably have some extra letters in there in case you want to do some stacking to create some dimension, and a black shadow coffee cup. You should have a miter frame. I do want to let those of you know who don't have the kit, I did use Whimsy Stamps 3-in-1 miter frame, and that's the largest frame. Also in your kit, you should have a piece of acetate and an A2 landscape card base in there as well. So we're going to go ahead now and get started with the process of creating the 2 cards. Now to get the process started, we're going to start by stamping our 3-in-1 miter frame and our solid coffee cup. I'm going to be using, like I mentioned before, the tartan background stamp from Whimsy. You can use any background stamp that you have available. It's completely up to you. I'm using VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp my frame and my coffee cup. Maybe you want to stamp yours in a different color. By all means, run with it. So I'm removing the foam piece out of my MISTI. I'm laying an inexpensive little sticky mat from the dollar store in there to hold my pieces in place while I'm stamping them. I'm going to go ahead and get the tartan background stamp lined up on the lid of the MISTI, and then I'm going to stamp the coffee cup and the frame using that black ink. Now, if you want, you can lay down a piece of scrap paper up underneath this while you're stamping it so you don't have cleanup. I'm not too worried about it. This mat has just about reached the end of its stickiness, and what I'm going to end up doing is taking this and cleaning all the stickiness off of it, and then use some masking tape around the edges and respray it with some low-tack spray to add the stickiness to it again and reuse the mat. So I'm just going to use alcohol to clean this ink off of it, and then I'm going to go ahead and stamp the frame. So these little mats are amazing, and because they're inexpensive, I think $1.25 or something like that, I don't have a problem using them like this, knowing that I can clean them up, tape them off, and spray them again with that low-tack adhesive spray. Hey, you can't go wrong with that, right? So let's go ahead and wipe it off, and then we'll lay down our 3-in-1 miter frame and get that stamped using that same background stamp and the same ink. Now, a couple of the things or a couple of colors that I thought about would be really fun with this are more fall themed colors. So orange and browns, and or maybe you want to do Christmas colors with this, reds and greens. You can do any color you want. It's completely up to you. I don't know why I picked the colors that I picked. I just went with them. And I mean, I like them, but I don't know that I would necessarily do these colors again if given the opportunity to redo this. But they're not terrible, but they're just not my favorite. I don't know what I was thinking the day that I did this. Anyway, so let's go ahead and stamp this 3-in-1 miter frame, and then we're going to move on to putting together. So just go ahead and set your stamped die cut pieces to the side and let those dry while you move on to assembling the shaker. So the first thing I'm going to do is grab a piece of Scotch low-tack tape and my acetate. I'm going to place the tape on one side of the acetate and see if that protective film is on that side. If not, flip it over, press the tape down again and pull back, and you'll see it easily removes the protective film without you having to worry about messing up your acetate. So now that we have that done, you can use glue, you can use double-sided tape, a tape runner, whatever you want to adhere your acetate to the back side of your stamped 3-in-1 miter frame. Now, I'm just going to use my tape runner because I find it super easy to work with. Run around the edges of it and go ahead and secure the acetate to there. Now, what I like to do is go ahead and line up the left and the top side of the frame and acetate so that I only have to cut off 2 edges because the acetate's a little bit bigger than the frame itself. Now, if you want, you can measure it and cut it before you adhere it to the back, but I find it so easy just to line that top left corner up and across the top and down the left side, making sure that nothing is hanging over on those 2 edges. And then we'll just take this to the paper trimmer and go ahead and trim the rest of the acetate away. It's pretty easy. Now, one of the things that was listed on your sheet in your kit that you would be needing from your craft room is foam adhesive. So you can use the big roll of foam adhesive, or you can use foam adhesive strips. I'm going to be using the strips. I think they're a little bit easier to work with when you have a smaller frame that like I'm working with here. So I'm going to take 2 strips. These are 1/8 of an inch each, and I'm going to peel 2 off at a time and keep them side by side and then just line them up around my frame. I'm actually going to use my Simon Says detail scissors that we got at the event. I really do like these. I find that I have several pairs of scissors. I have Tim Holtz, I have Simon Says Stamp, I have a couple of other brands as well, but I have found that I've been reaching for the Simon Says quite a bit lately. So I really do enjoy these scissors. And I think it was so generous of them to donate a pair to everybody at the event. So we're going to go ahead and go all the way around the back side of our frame, laying this mounting foam down over the acetate, making sure that you're keeping it behind your die cut piece. You don't want to be able to see it when you flip this over. Now I'm going to do 2 layers because the coffee mix that I'm using is a little bit thicker because it is the polymer clay mix. And so I felt like 2 layers of the foam would be great. Now I know some of you really like the double foam for shaker cards, but I have never used it. I just end up taking my pieces here and layering them up 2 or 3 times, however thick I want it to be. So one of the things you want to remember when you're doing your foam pieces, you want to make sure that all of the edges are touching each other, because if they're not, your shaker bits will fall out. Now, if you're like me and you might happen to have a friend who can take a practical joke, that would be a good one, right? But I don't recommend it on a regular basis. So go ahead and make sure that those pieces of foam are touching each other and that nothing's going to fly out when the recipient receives the shaker card and shakes it up. Another thing that you could use inside of this is actual coffee beans. You would have to really use several layers of foam adhesive if you wanted to use coffee beans. So once we have this done, you have a couple of options for adding your shaker bits. Sometimes, depending on how I'm feeling that day, I will lay my shaker bits directly down on my card base and then remove the release paper from the adhesive and center that frame over my card base. And I'm okay with that most of the time. But then I have times like today where I'm like not too sure of myself. So what I'll do is I will fill a piece, or I will flip the shaker over, fill it with the shaker bits, and then cut me a piece of white cardstock or acetate to go over the back side of the shaker. And then all I need to do is glue that to my card base. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to cut me a piece of white cardstock, and the size that you would need is going to be a little less than 4 inches. So I would say maybe 3 7/8 of an inch, and then 5 1/8 of an inch. Remember, this is the landscape, so you're going to want 3 7/8 of an inch high by 5 1/8 of an inch long if you're going to use a white piece of cardstock. We'll fill our shaker and then remove the release paper from the foam adhesive and cover the back of that with that white cardstock that we just cut. So now that we have the back on our shaker, we're going to flip it over and making sure that we've burnished around that foam adhesive really well. Give it a good shake. Now we're adding it to our card base using Barely Art glue. I absolutely love the Barely Art glue. It's all I use in my craft room now. And you can pick it up in the Whimsy Stamps online shop and at the boutique if you're in that area. So once we have this centered, we'll set this aside and we're going to move on to the next step in the card making process. So moving on to the next card, we're going to be coloring the It's Coffee Time. You should have this piece in your kit where you have just the letters It's Coffee Time. Now you see I took my coffee cup that has the It's Coffee Time cut out of it, and I went ahead and I punched all of those letters out. Now you can use those for layering, or you can just color them and use them if you want. We're going to use that as a guide to place all of these letters onto our stamped coffee cup. So what I recommend is that you take your stamped coffee cup, put it behind your white coffee cup with the die cut letters out of it, and then either temporarily adhere them together with, or lay them on your mat and use magnets to hold them in place. It's completely up to you how you do this, but just make sure that you have them secured together temporarily so that you can go ahead and start using that as a guide to lay each of these colored little letters back in place on your stamped coffee cup. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to glue the back side of each of these letters and then go ahead and place them back in to their spot in that die cut coffee cup. Now you want to be careful when you're doing this because you don't want to glue that white coffee cup to your stamped coffee cup. So what I recommend is every so often, stop what you're doing and make sure that the white coffee cup you're using as a template still comes up freely from your stamped coffee cup, and let it dry for a few minutes and then lay it back down and then add the letters in again. And there's different ways you can go about doing this. You can use press and seal to put the letters in place, but because we colored these and we're placing them in, it's not quite as easy as the press and seal, but you could make it work for you. Color all of them and then lay your press and seal down, lift them up, and then put them on the coffee cup if you wanted to. You can also use masking tape. You can use low tack, Scotch removable tape. Anything like that would work. I just found it easy for me to go ahead and place them in like this. And I'm going to be honest with you, this is kind of relaxing for me. I don't know what it is. It's almost like working a puzzle, and I really enjoy that. So if this is not your thing and you want to take a different approach to it, by all means, go ahead. But this is the way that I went about doing this, and I just kind of found myself relaxed and enjoying the process. So once we have all the letters in place, we're going to go ahead and remove the white die cut coffee cup and set it to the side because we're going to be ink blending that shortly. Right now, what I want to do is I want to do a little bit of coloring around the top of this coffee cup. And what I'm doing is I'm creating a rim around the coffee cup. So I'm using right now I'm coloring in the coffee part. So I'm using a really dark E49 to go ahead and cover that whole area where I feel like the coffee would be in my cup. Then I'm going to come in with my 110 black marker and I'm going to create that rim that I just spoke of. And all I'm doing is lightly going around the edges to create what I feel like would be the rim of my coffee cup. And you don't need to get too carried away with this. It's very simple. You can see how I'm taking it out to the edges here. So just take your time with this and color that rim in. And then, of course, I take my marker and insert it into that die cut piece there that's cut out and color in that white area too so the white doesn't show through. So that's all pretty simple there. I'm going to actually go over the coffee area a couple of times just to make sure I have it nice and dark. Now, if you wanted to, you could have masked that area off, or you can even die cut a piece to go back into that. But I just didn't feel the need to because I knew I was going to make this coffee really dark. And then I'm going to come in with a white gel pen and just add some white details to that area here shortly. So we'll go ahead and set that coffee cup aside and let it dry some more, giving those letters plenty of time to air dry. In the meantime, we're going to go ahead and move on to ink blending our next coffee cup with the letters cut out of it. This is for our shaker card. So what I want to recommend is if you have a small blender brush, to use a small blender brush to add ground espresso distress oxide ink here. Now, if you don't have distress oxides, don't worry about it. You can use any dye inks you have. It'll work fine for this. You could even color this with your alcohol markers or pencils, whatever you want. The whole thing that I'm trying to do right there is just get the coffee laid down in the coffee cup. Then I'm coming in with my spiced marmalade and I'm going to start ink blending. My table is shaking so bad for some reason in this video, and it normally does not do that, so I apologize for that. So what we're doing here is I want the center of the coffee cup to stay pretty light. So I'm working from the edges and moving my way in with my blender brush. And this is just a Whimsy Stamps blender brush. These are amazing little blender brushes. In fact, I picked up a whole new set while I was down there before I came back. And I'm going to be breaking those in during videos shortly. So you can see how I left that area at the top center of the coffee cup the lightest. Now, you can use any colors you want for this. So as I'm doing this, I'm realizing the coffee is not looking like it should. And that's because I used the wrong Distress Oxide ink. I actually used Vintage Photo instead of ground espresso. Now, if that's something that happens to you, I recommend just grab your ground espresso and go back over what you've already done. In the meantime, I want to share a tip with you. Because my brush is bigger, I don't have the smaller brushes, you can grab a Q-tip and ink blend that area, and it works great. So what I'm doing here is I'm cutting out the pieces that didn't cut all the way out when this cup was die cut. So if you ever have that issue, you run your paper through your die cut machine, you have it over at your work area, and you realize the pieces aren't coming out like you wanted, you can just take your paper craft knife and run along those die cut edges and lightly run across there, and then those will pop right out. It just needs a little bit more help falling out is all it is. So we're going to be putting this on that black piece of cardstock. And like I mentioned just a few seconds ago, I'm realizing that that coffee is just not the way that I want it to because I used the wrong ink. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some double-ended Q-tips that I have in my craft room and add that ground espresso over that vintage photo ink and go ahead and blend that out just a little bit more. Now, once you're happy with the ink blended cup, we're going to just go ahead and flip it over and add that Bearly Art glue and secure it to that black shadow die cut piece that came in your kit. Once I have that down, I'm going to set it aside and let it dry while I start to ink blend the 7 little oval pieces. Now, the easiest way that I know to tell you to do this is lay those down on a piece of masking paper and then ink blend over those. So it just makes it a little bit easier by using that masking tape to hold those pieces in place while you're ink blending them. Now, if you were doing this at home, I would recommend that you ink blend your paper first, then die cut the pieces out. But because this is a kit and those were already die cut out, I recommend using that masking paper. Now, we're going to go ahead and add the center to our O on our coffee cup. And then we'll add that to our shaker card using mounting foam. We're also going to go ahead and add all the rest of the pieces to our shaker card, and that's going to wrap that card up. Now, for this cup, I decided to use a large roll of mounting foam, the 3M mounting foam. I like the sturdiness of this to add the cup to the front of the shaker card. But if you have round foam adhesives or square foam adhesives, or even just the strips, by all means, go ahead and use them. If you want to skip the dimension on the coffee cup and just add it directly to the acetate, I recommend a double-sided tape like score tape for that. You can use glue, but you need to know it's going to take it a long time to dry to the acetate, and that's why I don't recommend liquid glue when you're gluing things to acetate. So either foam adhesives or double-sided tape is what I would recommend. So I added my foam tape to the back of the cup. I did 3 small strips, and then I centered it up on the front of my shaker. I'm going to go ahead and use my 1/8 of an inch wide foam strips and add these little pieces around the coffee cup. Now, these are supposed to be kind of like exaggerations, right? Like it's coffee time. That's the best way I know to describe these pieces, kind of like it's just to emphasize it's coffee time, right? So you can add the little oval pieces anywhere you want on your card. You don't have to add them exactly like I'm adding mine. Again, this is a great time for you to make this your own. So I encourage you to use any color ink you wanted to use with this. I encourage you to use any background stamp. And again, I'm going to encourage you to place your pieces where you want them to be on your card and really make this your own. So these little 1/8 of an inch strips are left over from where I was adding it to the back of the frame for the shaker card. So I'm just coming in. If I need to snip them down to make them a little bit shorter, those Simon Says Stamp detail scissors are perfect for that because they're non-stick scissors. And so you don't end up with the gumminess of the adhesive sticking to your scissors. I love that about those scissors. So I'm going to go ahead and continue adding these on, and then we're going to move on in and finish wrapping up our second card and wrapping up this video as well. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and move into wrapping up our second card. Well, we're going to start with the 3 pieces from the Slimline Fence die. These have that wood grain texture to them. And I'm using my Copic markers. You can use any brown colors you want. I'm using E29 and E27. And I'm using the chisel nib in just to quickly color over each of these pieces. We're going to be cutting these down to fit the front of our A2 card. So I'm just working right in the center, and I'm not even going to worry about coloring the whole piece. Once I have these colored, you see how easy it is. It's so simple. We're going to go ahead and put these together using foam adhesive tape. Now you can just glue these down straight to your card base if you want to, but I like the dimension that it gives. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to flip these over and then I'm going to line them up using the grid on my glass mat so that I can make sure they're straight while I'm adding the adhesive to them, and I want them touching. I don't want any gaps in between them. I'm going to do the same thing with the next piece. So there you can see I had a little bit of gap, so I just gently pulled back on it so that I can come back in and reposition it. Now, if you still, once you have them together and you think you still see some white, I don't want you to worry about that. We're going to come in with a black marker and create a little bit of dimension in those cracks there once we have everything put together. So again, I'm coming in with more of the mounting foam and securing the last piece to the first two pieces so that we can secure this to our card base. Now, I want to recommend that you use some kind of grid mat or a T-ruler so you make sure you're getting these lined up straight. I'm just going to use my grid mat here to go ahead and make sure everything's lined up. You're going to see me rearrange my card here and lay a magnet on it so it stays in place. Sometimes I just go with it and place it down, but not today. I'm like, let's make sure this is straight. And so I'm just lining it up, leaving 1/4 of an inch at the bottom of that card base showing, and then lining it up. I'm going to take my scissors and go ahead and trim the excess off the ends. You can use your paper trimmer to trim that excess away, but I figured, well, since I already had the adhesive on the back, I don't want to fight with my paper trimmer. So I grabbed a larger pair of scissors to trim that excess away. Now you could cut these down to size before you ever even put the mounting foam on the back of them, but I just went with it this way. So if you want to do that, go ahead and cut them down to 4 1/4. And you see you have very little left over. We're just going to toss that in the trash. We're not going to need that. Now, since we have our boards laid out here, I'm going to come in with like either a very dark E49 or even black marker. And I'm going to lightly color in area where the die cut pieces come together and touch. And it's creating a little bit of dimension there, making it look like it's pieces of board put together to create a tabletop. So once I have that done, I'm going to grab a light E23 and I'm going to color over any areas that are white because the slimline fence die embosses the wood grain into the paper for us. And a little bit of it was white and I didn't want it to stand out quite so much. So I'm just bringing in a very light brown color, E23, and going over any areas that look white to me, just to knock that white back a little bit. So when I first did the areas to create the darkness in between each die cut piece, I first used E49. I do decide that I want it to be a little bit darker, and I'm going to come in with a black marker and touch that up one more time. And then we'll go ahead and start to assemble this. The first thing I recommend is decide the placement of the cup. How far down on that wood grain tabletop do you want your cup to sit? Once you figure that out, then you'll know how much mounting foam to put on the back of your cup. So I'm going to go ahead and add my mounting foam to the back of it and secure it down. You can even add glue to the bottom part of the cup that's laying on those wood boards we created so that it's secure. Once we have that done, let's grab our 3 layers of steam and go ahead and start to adhere those together. Now these were cut so they'd be a little bit longer than what you need them. I recommend that we put these together first and then get them on the card and then cut away the excess. So what I do is I start with the darkest gray on the bottom layer and I add a little bit of my Bearly Art glue to the right side, and then I layer the white piece onto that dark gray piece, leaving just a little bit of the dark gray showing. We're going to repeat that by adding some glue to the right side of the white piece of die cut paper and then adding our lighter gray to the top. And then you're going to see me secure these down in that die cut area. There's an open area right there. And these will slide right down in there, creating the steam for our cup. So I'm going to add glue to the back of these pieces and secure them down. And then you want to let them dry for a few minutes, and then we'll come in and cut away the excess. So while I let that dry for just a few seconds, I'm going to go ahead and stamp my sentiment. Now remember, I'm using the Thinking About You stamp from the Coffee Break stamp set. You can use any sentiment you have. It's completely up to you. I'm stamping with VersaFine Onyx Black ink because that is my favorite detail ink, especially for sentiments. Once I have the sentiment stamped, I'm just going to set it aside and let it dry, and I'm going to carefully cut away the excess from the steam because I feel like that's sat long enough and the glue has dried enough for us to go ahead and cut that excess away, and then you get to see what it looks like. Now, for this card, I'm actually going to play around with it a little bit and make it a little different from the sample you see on the far left there. So I'm going to add mounting foam strips to the back of my sentiment. Again, you can skip all of the foam adhesives and just go straight with glue or double-sided tape if you don't like all the dimension. I love dimension on my cards. And as you can see there, that's the moment I decided that I kind of actually like this at the bottom better than I like it at the top. And that's the really cool thing about this. You can make it whatever you want. I'm even changing up my own card. So I'm going to add this centered right below the coffee cup. Now, if you like it somewhere else on your card, please, by all means, that's where I want you to put it. So once I decide that's where I'm going to have it, I grab my Simon Says Stamp T-ruler, and I'm going to use that to help me make sure I get this sentiment strip lined up straight and centered on my card base. So I'm laying some magnets down just to hold the card in place while I position my sentiment strip down, because I do not want to try to pull this up again and mess anything up. So take your time with it and just be mindful of where you're placing it, and be sure you're using that T-ruler or a guide to help you get that straight. So you can see I really love the way that card just looks compared to the one on the left. It's funny how the second go around, I'm seeing things that even I would change. So now that we have that on there, we're going to go ahead and add our oval shapes, and I'm going to add a little bit of white highlight to the coffee area to give it just a little bit of variation there. And I'm going to use my white cartoonist pen for that. So if you don't have a Zig cartoonist pen, you most certainly can use a white jelly pen to add those white details to your coffee. So here I'm coming in, and what I did was, instead of using gray, I decided I wanted my oval shapes to be the same color as the letters on my coffee cup. So I just colored those gray pieces with my R08 Copic marker, the same marker I used to color the letters on the coffee cup, but you could color them any color you want them. And then I used my foam adhesive strips to add those around the coffee cup. And you can see the difference in the two cards there. I really like the one on the right better than the one on the left. They're both great, but I just prefer the one on the right. So I really do hope you enjoyed the last take and make with me. I appreciate you sticking around. I'm kind of like a fish out of water right now because I'm so out of the loop. Don't forget, you can also catch me over on my YouTube channel, sharing lots of fun tutorials over there as well. So let me know down in the comments what you thought about the take and make. Let me know what you thought about the whole workshop weekend. If you didn't have the opportunity to attend the workshop weekend, but you watched the beginning of the video and saw the photos that I shared, let me know your thoughts on those as well. And as always, one more time, affiliate links are down in the description box below for you to use if you would like. We really do appreciate you joining us here. We want you to know we had an amazing time with all of you guys. I absolutely enjoyed meeting each and every one of you, and I will never forget my first Whimsy Stamps Workshop Weekend with all of you. You made it so very special for me. Thank you. Until next time, please take care.